The chain scraped once across the concrete and the white horse lifted his head. His eyes were pale and steady, almost human. People went quiet. A woman covered her mouth. A boy stepped back like the floor moved. The horse looked over every face as if he counted them, then fixed on one man near the aisle. The man's shoulders stiffened. He whispered, "No, not possible." The horse breathed out, slow and heavy, and the whole barn seemed to hold its breath with him. The auction barn smelled of hay and old rain. Owen Hale tapped the microphone, but the usual jokes did not come. "Lot 17, he said, voice thin. Unclaimed gelding brought in from County Line Road. The handlers kept a hard grip on the chain, though the horse only stood, white coat dull under the dust. Elias Grant had not planned to sit in the front row. He had not planned to come at all. But Lily had begged him, and now she squeezed his hand. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why is he looking at you?" Elias did not answer. He stared at the faint crescent scar above the horse's eye, the same shape he used to trace with his thumb years ago. "It can't be," he said, but his voice lacked weight. A man in a neat denim jacket drifted to the side gate. He kept his hat pulled low. He did not bid. He watched. The horse flicked an ear, turned, and then faced Elias again like the rest of the barn did not exist. "Ash," Elias said before he could stop himself. The word escaped like a secret. Lily looked up. "You knew him?" Elias swallowed. "I trained a white one once," he said. "He was lost in the flood." Owen cleared his throat. "Let's start at 200. No paddles rose. The crowd only stared at the white horse and the old man who could not look away. The handler tugged the chain. The horse stepped once, then stopped, pressed the side of his face against the rail, and held still there, inches from Elias. The barn rustled with soft gasps. The man in the denim jacket finally spoke, careful and calm. "That horse came off my pasture," he said. "Name's Glacier." Elias did not blink. "If his name was Glacier," he said, "why did he answer to Ash?" The horse turned his head and breathed into Elias's open palm, like he remembered the shape of it. Somewhere in the back, someone whispered, "This wasn't on the list." The handlers tried again to pull the horse forward, but he leaned back, eyes locked on Elias like the chain meant nothing. The crowd murmured louder this time, uneasy whispers moving through the benches. "What's wrong with him?" someone asked. "He looks like he knows that old man." Elias felt Lily's hand trembling in his. He whispered almost to himself, "It's him. I buried him years ago, but it's him." His voice cracked and Lily leaned closer. "Grandpa, if you buried him, how can he be here?" The man in the denim jacket stepped closer to the ring, boots echoing on the wood. "He's mine," he said firmly, showing a folded slip of paper. "Bought and paid for. You folks are chasing ghosts." Owen Hale cleared his throat nervously. "Sir, we don't usually interrupt bidding for private claims." The man didn't move his eyes from Elias. "That's not a claim. That's ownership." He raised the paper high, but his hand shook slightly. Ruth Bennett, the retired vet sitting in the back row, stood slowly. Her voice, though soft, carried across the barn. "Papers can be forged. Scars cannot." She pointed to the faint mark above the horse's eye. "I stitched that cut myself 19 years ago. That horse was called Ash. Everyone in this county knew it." A hush fell heavier than before. Elias rose from his seat, knees stiff, but his eyes never leaving the horse. "Ash," he said again, louder this time. The horse pushed once more against the chain and let out a sound that wasn't a whinny. It was rougher, broken, like memory in the shape of noise. Lily gasped. "Grandpa, he remembers you." The crowd stirred, torn between awe and fear. The man in denim's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. "Memories don't hold up in court," he said coldly. "Only signatures do." He waved the paper again, but fewer eyes looked at it now. All were watching the old man and the horse pressed together by something stronger than chains. The sheriff had been leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, saying nothing while the crowd argued. Now he stepped forward, heavy boots striking the boards. "Hand me that paper," he said to the man in the denim jacket. The man hesitated, then passed it over with a stiff nod. The sheriff unfolded it, scanned the page and frowned. "Strange," he muttered. "The date here is 7 years back, but the notary seal on this belongs to a woman who passed away 8 years ago." He raised his eyes. "How do you explain that?" The barn stirred again, louder this time, voices rising like a storm. Elias stood near the rail, his hand resting against Ash's cheek, feeling the warmth he thought he'd lost forever. The horse stayed steady, unmoving as if guarding him. Lily whispered, "He knows you, Grandpa." He knows. Elias nodded once, though his throat burned too much to speak. Ruth Bennett walked closer, her cane tapping against the floor. This horse was burned in the Carson flood barn, she said clearly. I saw the wounds. I kept records. She pointed her cane toward the scar above Ash's eye. That was never Glacier. That was Ash, and everybody here who remembers the fire knows it. The man in denim clenched his jaw. You're all seeing what you want to see, he snapped. That flood was chaos. Horses died. People made mistakes. This one was sold to me fair and legal. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. The sheriff folded the paper and slipped it into his vest. No one's taking this horse tonight, he said firmly. He stays in county custody until I've sorted the truth. If you've got more proof, bring it to my office by Monday. Until then, he doesn't move. Ash pressed his forehead harder into Elias's hand, and Elias felt something stir inside him he had locked away for years. The fire, the flood, the night he thought both his horse and his boy had been swallowed by the water, it all rushed back like it had never left. He whispered, too low for anyone else. You came back. Why now? Ash breathed slow against his palm, steady, like he carried the answer in silence. That night Elias couldn't sleep. He sat on the porch while Lily dozed on the couch inside, clutching the blanket she refused to let go of after the auction. The stars hung low and sharp, but Elias's mind was not on the sky. It was back in the flood, the rush of water, the burning smell of soaked timber, and the sound of horses crying out as the barn collapsed. He had told everyone Ash was lost that night, same as Tommy. He told himself too. Now the white horse stood in a county pen, breathing proof against his hand, and all those years of silence pressed on him like a weight. Across town, Ruth Bennett had not gone to bed either. She had pulled out an old box from her attic, dust flying as she set it on the kitchen table. Inside were faded vet logs, notes written in her own hand, and a Polaroid picture of Ash taken the week before the flood. In the photo, Tommy stood beside him, grinning, arm looped proudly around the horse's neck. The same scar above the eye, the same faint curve on the blaze. She held the picture under the lamp and whispered, "You never died, did you?" Meanwhile, the man in denim had vanished from the motel where he claimed to be staying. The clerk told the sheriff the room was empty by sundown, bed untouched, key left on the desk. Only a torn scrap of paper was found in the trash, half a photograph of a younger Elias holding Ash, burned at the edges as if someone had tried to destroy it. At dawn, Elias walked back to the barnyard where the sheriff had ordered Ash held. The horse paced, ears pricked, restless but alive with strength. Elias leaned against the rail, voice low. "If you survive, boy, then I've lived with a lie for 20 years. Did I bury the wrong past?" Ash turned his head, stepped close, and pressed his muzzle against Elias's shoulder, breathing steady. In that quiet moment Elias understood. The story of the flood was not finished. Someone had carried Ash away that night. Someone had kept him hidden. And someone had come back to claim him now. By midday the whole town was buzzing. Word from the auction had spread faster than gossip usually did, and now everyone seemed to have an opinion. Some swore it was Ash, the horse from the flood, while others muttered it was just another white gelding with unlucky scars. Elias stayed quiet, though inside his chest questions beat louder than his heart. He had spent 2 decades telling himself the past was buried, but the past was now standing in a pen behind the sheriff's barn. Sheriff Clark shuffled through old files at his desk, the auction paper lying open beside him. The notary stamp was crooked, the handwriting too neat. He rubbed his jaw and muttered, "This doesn't smell right." He picked up the phone and called the state registrar in Nashville. "I need confirmation on a livestock bill of sale. Name's Henry Cole. 7 years back." His eyes narrowed as he listened. No record. And the notary listed passed away the year before? He hung up with a curse. Something was rotten, and not just the paper. Back at the barn, Lily crept close to Ash's pen while Elias watched from the fence. She reached her small hand through the bars, whispering, "If you're really Ash, tap your hoof." For a moment the horse stood still, ears flicking. Then, soft but clear, he struck the ground once. Lily's gasp carried across the yard. "Grandpa," he answered me. Elias felt his throat close. He wanted to believe, but belief meant opening a wound he had kept shut since Tommy's death. Just then Ruth arrived, clutching the Polaroid she had found the night before. She pressed it into Elias's rough hands. "Look," she said. The photo showed Tommy, young and laughing, with Ash at his side. Same scar, same blaze. Elias's knees weakened. "That's him," he whispered. "It's always been him." Ash stretched his head over the rail, nudging the photo as if he, too, remembered. The sheriff drove up then, dust trailing behind his truck. He waved a folder as he climbed out. "I checked," he said. "That man in denim, Henry Cole, he doesn't exist. Not legally, not on record." He paused, lowering his voice. But the registrar found something else. 20 years back, a stable hand named Jesse Cole worked right here in this county. Quiet boy, kept to himself. Disappeared the week after the flood. Elias froze. He remembered Jesse. The boy who always lingered too close to Tommy, always watching Ash with a look that was hard to read. His hands trembled. "You're saying Henry Cole is Jesse Cole?" The sheriff nodded once. "And if he came back for this horse, it means he wasn't done with whatever started 20 years ago." Elias sat on the porch steps that evening, the Polaroid resting in his lap. The air smelled of dust and cut grass, but all he could smell was smoke from that long-ago night. Lily leaned against him, quiet for once. "Grandpa," she whispered, "why would he hide Ash all these years?" Elias rubbed the photo with his thumb. "Because the flood wasn't what it seemed. And if Jesse Cole came back, then the truth we buried with that water is still out there." At the sheriff's office, Clark unfolded the old fire report he had dug out of the archives. The page was brittle, the ink faded. It listed one equine body recovered, assumed to be Ash. But in the margin, scrawled in pencil, were two faint letters, J.C. Clark tapped the note and frowned. Jesse Cole's initials. A chill prickled the back of his neck. He picked up the phone and called Ruth. "Does the name Jesse Cole mean anything to you?" Her voice was hushed on the other end. "He worked for Elias back then. Shy boy. Used to muck stalls. He left town right after the flood. Folks said he never came back." Clark's knuckles whitened around the receiver. "He did come back," he muttered. "And he brought the horse with him." Meanwhile, Elias wandered into his old barn at dusk, Lily trailing close behind. The beams creaked under the weight of years. In the far corner, half hidden behind rusted tools, a blackened plank still smelled faintly of smoke. Lily touched it and squinted. "Grandpa, there's something carved here." She brushed the soot away with her sleeve. Faint letters appeared, Tommy plus Ash. Her fingers trembled over the mark. "He loved him, didn't he?" Elias swallowed hard. "More than anything." Back at the holding pen, Ash paced as if restless, ears flicking toward the hills. Ruth stood nearby, studying him under the last light. She whispered to herself, "He remembers everything. Even the night it all went wrong." And in the distance, along the ridge road, a lone figure moved through the trees, hat pulled low, steps hurried but familiar. Jesse Cole had not run far. He was circling back as though unfinished business waited in the very town he once abandoned. The next morning, the church bell rang earlier than usual, calling the town together. Folks whispered in the square, curiosity dragging them from their breakfast tables. Sheriff Clark stood on the steps with Elias and Ruth at his side. Lily clutched the Polaroid, holding it to her chest like proof stronger than words. Clark cleared his throat. "Last night I confirmed something. The man who claimed the white horse isn't Henry Cole. He's Jesse Cole, the stable hand who vanished after the flood. His papers are false. His story doesn't hold." The crowd shifted uneasily. Hazel Thornton, who had been at the barn 20 years ago, raised her cane. "I remember that boy," she said, voice trembling. "Always lurking near the stalls. Always watching that horse like it wasn't his to want." Murmurs rippled through the people. Some nodded, others looked away. Elias stepped forward, hat in his hands. His voice cracked but carried. "I told myself for years Ash died with my boy. I believed it because believing otherwise meant asking questions I was too broken to ask. But Ash lived. Which means the night of the flood wasn't what we thought." He lifted his gaze across the crowd. "Someone let him out. And someone didn't come back for Tommy." The silence that followed was thick, heavy enough to bow heads. Lily tugged her grandfather's sleeve. "Tell them," she whispered. Elias closed his eyes, then forced the words out. "I always suspected. Jesse was the last to see my son alive. He had reason, and now he has returned with the proof we buried." A rustle at the back of the square drew every eye. A man stood in the shadow of the doorway, hat low, face leaner than before but unmistakable. Jesse Cole. His hands hung loose at his sides, but his eyes burned with something caught between guilt and defiance. Gasps shivered through the crowd. Clark's hand went to his belt, though he made no move. Jesse's voice was raw when it finally came. "You've carried lies long enough," he said. "But don't you dare think I carried them alone." The crowd stiffened, breaths held, waiting for the storm they felt in his words. Elias felt his knees weaken, but he stood firm, staring across the square at Jesse. The years had carved hollows into the man's face, yet his eyes were the same, restless, sharp, hiding too much. "Then speak," Elias said, voice steady though his hands trembled. "If you've carried something, let this town hear it." Jesse's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "You want the truth?" I envied Tommy. He had everything, your pride, the best horse, the future I thought should have been mine. I never planned for him to die. I only wanted to scare him. But fear spreads like fire, and fire doesn't stop once it starts. His words cracked at the edges, but the crowd heard every one. People gasped, some whispering prayers. Sheriff Clark stepped forward, face hard. "So you admit it? What happened wasn't an accident?" Jesse nodded, jaw clenched. The lantern tipped. "I never meant for the floodwater and flames to swallow the barn, but when it did, I couldn't go back. I pulled Ash out because I couldn't let him burn, but I left Tommy inside. And I've lived with that night every day since." Ruth's cane tapped sharply on the boards. "You let a boy die, Jesse. And you let this man believe his horse perished too. That isn't living with it. That's hiding." Her voice was weary but fierce. Elias's chest burned. For 20 years he had blamed himself, for trusting Jesse, for not reaching the barn in time. Now the truth stood before him in flesh and bone. He took a step closer, every wrinkle in his face heavy with grief. "You let me mourn 2 graves that never should have been. My son deserved more. Ash deserved more." His voice broke. Jesse's shoulders sagged. He raised his hands as though surrendering to something larger than the sheriff's badge. "I'm done running. If justice is left, I'll take it." His words carried no fight, only the hollow weight of confession. Ash, held in the sheriff's pen nearby, let out a low, aching call that carried into the square, silencing the crowd again. Lily gripped her grandfather's hand tighter, whispering, "He knows the truth too, Grandpa. He never forgot." The square stood frozen, caught between sorrow and relief, waiting to see what Elias would say next. The square felt heavy with silence after Jesse's confession, as if the whole town was holding its breath. Elias's eyes burned as he looked at the man who had stolen his son's future and twisted his own past. For years, he had carried guilt like a stone in his chest, believing the fire and flood had been his failure alone. Now he saw the truth standing before him, trembling in shame. Sheriff Clark cleared his throat. "Jesse Cole, you'll answer for this in court," he said firmly, but Elias raised a hand. "Not yet." His voice was rough but commanding enough to still the sheriff's step. The old man took one slow stride toward Jesse, the crowd parting without a word. He stopped just feet away, staring into the hollow face. "You wanted my son's life because you thought yours was empty," Elias said. "But all you did was empty every heart in this town." His voice cracked, but he kept going. "You can't undo what's done. But you can't hide it anymore either." Jesse swallowed hard, his voice thin. "I thought time would bury it. I thought if I kept Ash I could erase the night. But every day I heard the fire in my head. Every time that horse looked at me, I saw Tommy's face." His shoulders slumped like a man finally crushed by his own secret. From the edge of the pen, Ash let out a sharp snort, stamping once as though the sound itself was judgment. The crowd stirred, whispers rippling again. Lily, still clutching the Polaroid, stepped forward until she stood between her grandfather and Jesse. Her small voice carried farther than anyone expected. "If you're sorry, then don't run anymore. Tell everyone the truth, not just here but wherever you tried to hide it." Jesse's eyes glistened. He nodded once, no fight left in him. "I'll face what's coming," he whispered. Sheriff Clark finally placed a hand on Jesse's arm, not roughly but with the certainty of law. "Then you'll answer for the fire, for the lies, and for all the years stolen." The crowd exhaled as one, the square filled with murmurs, anger, grief, relief tangled together. Elias turned toward the pen, where Ash watched him with steady eyes. "We both lost the same night," he whispered. "But you came back so the truth could too." And for the first time in 2 decades, Elias felt his burden shift, lighter, as if the horse had carried it with him all along. That evening the town gathered again, this time in the old church hall, its wooden beams glowing under lantern light. The benches overflowed with neighbors, ranchers, and families who had carried whispers of the flood for years. At the front, Elias stood beside Lily, the Polaroid clasped tight in her hands. Sheriff Clark kept Jesse seated quietly off to the side, his wrists bound, though the man didn't resist. His head hung low, and for once he seemed smaller than the boy Elias remembered from long ago. Elias cleared his throat, voice rough but steady. "For 20 years I stayed silent. I told myself Ash was gone, and with him my son's laughter. I thought if I buried the truth deep enough, the pain would stay buried too. But silence doesn't heal, it rots. Tonight you all heard Jesse's confession. You heard what he did. And you saw the horse that returned to prove it. He paused, eyes sweeping the crowd. Ash lived though he was hidden. Tommy didn't. And we've all carried the weight of that night. Ruth Bennett stepped forward, cane tapping against the boards. She lifted her chin, her eyes moist. Horses don't fake memory. I've said it once and I'll say it again. That horse remembered his true name and the man who raised him. That's more proof than papers ever gave. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Jesse finally raised his head. His voice cracked, heavy with years of swallowed guilt. I can't undo what I stole. I can't bring back your boy. But I'll stand before a judge and answer for it. No more running. His words were not defiant. They were hollow, worn. Lily stepped closer to her grandfather, slipping her hand into his. Grandpa, you don't have to carry it alone anymore, she whispered. Elias blinked hard, pressing her fingers gently. From outside the hall, a sharp whinny carried through the night. The crowd turned toward the windows where Ash's silhouette stood against the pale moonlight, head lifted high as if he too demanded to be heard. For a moment no one spoke. The sound filled the hall like a promise that the truth, though painful, had finally broken free. Elias lifted his gaze, voice softer now. We can't change what's gone, but we can face it together. That's how healing begins. And in that lantern glow, the town, long divided by rumor and silence, nodded as one, their grief shared, their voices united. The morning after the town hall, Elias walked to the pasture where Ash had been moved for safekeeping. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around the fence rails. The horse stood quietly, head bowed, as though he carried the same exhaustion that weighed on his old trainer's shoulders. Elias rested his hands on the top rail. For a long while he said nothing. Then in a low, cracked voice he began, I blamed myself, boy. Every day since that night I told myself I should have been faster, stronger, wiser. I thought you and Tommy were gone because of me. His throat tightened. But it wasn't me. And you never left. Ash lifted his head, ears flicking, and stepped closer until his breath warmed Elias's palms. The contact sent a shiver down Elias's arms, like something broken inside him had been waiting for this touch to mend. Behind him, Lily's small voice broke the quiet. Grandpa, he forgave you a long time ago. Can't you forgive yourself? Elias turned to see her clutching the Polaroid again, her eyes wide with a mix of sorrow and hope. Ruth arrived moments later, carrying a worn folder. I found something in my old records, she said, handing it to Elias. Inside was a microchip registration from 2 decades ago, stamped with Ash's original ID. She smiled faintly. We scanned him last night. It matches. The paper trembled in Elias's hands as tears blurred his vision. Proof. Absolute. Ash had survived. Sheriff Clark drove up in his truck, dust billowing in the morning light. He leaned out the window, voice steady. Jesse Cole's being held until transfer. He'll face trial in the county court. It's done. Elias nodded, though his gaze never left the horse. It's not done, he murmured. Not until I learn to live with what's left. Ash lowered his head again, pressing into Elias's chest this time as if pushing him upright. Lily watched, whispering, See, Grandpa? He came back to carry you through. The old man's hands trembled, but for the first time in years, his lips curved into the faintest smile. In the distance, the church bell rang again, not for mourning this time, but for gathering. The town was ready to speak openly, ready to bury lies instead of truth. And for Elias, the weight he carried began to loosen, not gone but lighter, because Ash had returned to remind him that even after loss, some bonds refuse to die. That evening, the townsfolk filled the pasture, drawn not by summons but by their own need to see the truth with their own eyes. Children clutched their mothers' skirts, old men leaned on canes, and whispers threaded through the crowd like restless wind. At the center stood Elias, Lily by his side, and Ash, calm as if he belonged to the land itself. The setting sun washed the horse's coat in gold, making him glow against the green hills. Sheriff Clark addressed the people first. The court will decide Jesse Cole's fate, he said firmly. But what matters tonight is that this town knows the truth. Ash is no ghost, no rumor. He is living proof of what really happened 20 years ago. His words carried weight, but it was the horse's stillness that held everyone's attention. Hazel Thornton, frail but unafraid, lifted her voice. I saw the fire that night. I heard the screams. I thought I saw that horse fall. I've lived with that image in my head for years. But here he stands. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe we all were. Her words cracked, But tears slipped freely and she wasn't alone. Others dabbed their eyes as if their own memories were finally loosening. Elias stepped forward then, resting a weathered hand on Ash's neck. I told myself silence was strength, he began. That if I didn't speak of the fire, if I buried the memory, I could protect my family from pain. But silence doesn't protect, it poisons. I see that now. Tommy deserved to have the truth told. Ash deserved it too. His voice broke but steadied again. So tonight I lay the burden down. No more lies. No more silence. The crowd stood hushed, moved not by spectacle but by honesty. Lily slipped the Polaroid from her pocket and held it high for everyone to see. This is my daddy and Ash, she said clearly. He was real then. He's real now. And he came back so we wouldn't forget. Ash lifted his head and let out a deep, rolling cry that echoed against the hills. It was a sound of mourning but also of survival. People gasped, some clasping hands, others bowing heads. The cry seemed to close a circle long left open. In that shared silence afterward, Elias whispered to himself but loud enough for Lily to hear, "Some losses never leave us, but truth can set us free." And as the last light faded, the town finally understood. The horse hadn't returned for vengeance, but to carry memory back into the open, where healing could finally begin. The following week, the trial began in the county courthouse. Jesse Cole sat at the defendant's table, head bowed, while neighbors filled the benches behind him. Some glared, some pitted, but all wanted answers. Elias took the stand first. His hands shook as he swore the oath, but when he looked at Jesse, his voice grew firm. For 20 years, I believed my horse and my son died together. I blamed myself every day. But the truth was stolen from me, by him. He pointed once, steady. The room rustled with murmurs. Jesse lifted his eyes only briefly. I never meant for Tommy to die, he muttered, voice hollow. I only meant to scare him. I thought if Ash trusted me instead, maybe I'd matter. The confession landed like a weight across the court. Ruth Bennett rose as witness next, presenting the old vet records and microchip ID. This horse is Ash. No other. I treated him myself. You cannot erase scars. And you cannot erase memory. Her testimony sealed what few doubted now. The judge, an older man who had lived through the same flood, leaned forward. You concealed this horse for years, Jesse Cole, and with it the truth of a boy's death. The law cannot bring Tommy back, but it will hold you accountable. He delivered the sentence. Years in prison, no chance of vanishing again into another false name. Jesse lowered his head. No protests, no anger. Only a man hollowed out by the consequences of envy and silence. When court adjourned, Elias walked slowly outside, Lily holding his hand. Ash waited in a nearby pasture under Ruth's care, his white coat catching the autumn sun. Townsfolk gathered around the fence, not to argue, but to watch quietly, as though the horse carried not just Elias's grief but theirs as well. Lily pressed her cheek to her grandfather's arm. It's over now, isn't it? Elias sighed deeply. No, child. Grief never ends. But truth lets us breathe again. He stepped toward the fence, resting his forehead against Ash's. The horse stood still as if understanding. For the first time in decades, Elias let his tears fall in front of others, not as a sign of weakness but of release. The crowd did not turn away. They shared in it because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. That night, Elias whispered a prayer under the stars, for Tommy, for Ash, even for Jesse. The wind stirred through the fields, carrying the sound of Ash's steady breathing, and in that rhythm Elias found a fragile peace, one born not from forgetting, but from finally facing what had always been waiting to be told. Autumn stretched deeper into the valley, and life in the town slowly settled, though nothing felt quite the same. Jesse's name was now spoken only in hushed tones, and his absence left behind more than relief, it left reflection. People realized how silence had wrapped the whole town, letting suspicion and guilt fester in shadows. Now, with the truth out, neighbors spoke more openly, sharing memories of Tommy, remembering the boy not just for his death but for his laughter, his kindness, the way he could coax even the most stubborn horse to run free. Elias spent his mornings at the pasture with Ash. The horse had grown calmer, as though he, too, understood his place was no longer questioned. Sometimes Elias would stand for hours without saying a word, just resting a hand against Ash's side. Other times he spoke in whispers, telling him things he had never spoken aloud. Tommy carved your name on the old beam, he said one day, voice soft. We found it still there after all this time. You carried him in ways I never could. Ash flicked an ear, breathing slow and steady, and Elias felt less alone. Lily began visiting daily as well, brushing Ash's coat under Ruth's guidance. She laughed when the horse nudged her shoulder, calling him family without hesitation. Her presence reminded Elias of the bond between his son and Ash, a bond that had outlived both fire and flood. "He came back for you, Grandpa," she said once. Elias shook his head gently. "No, child. He came back for us all." One evening at a small gathering, Sheriff Clark raised a simple thought that lingered long after. "Maybe it wasn't just luck that saved Ash," he said. "Maybe he lived so the truth could live too." Heads nodded around the table, for it felt right. Ash had become more than a horse. He was living memory, unbroken testimony against lies and silence. As winter drew near, Elias found himself lighter than he had in years. The grief was still there, but not as a chain. It had become a lesson, one he carried openly. He told Lily, "The past will always mark us, but the truth keeps us from drowning in it. That's the only way to honor what we've lost." She leaned against him, smiling faintly, and in that moment Elias felt the first true peace of his old age. Moral lesson: the story of Ash reminded everyone that truth, no matter how long it takes, must come into the light. Hiding pain does not heal it, only facing it together can. And sometimes, the bonds we believe broken return to show us the strength we forgot we had.